I'm Mark Gagan, and you're listening to a special episode of the Voice of Insurance podcast, produced in association with AdvantageGo. Pick and choose your own best-of-breed insurtech and data providers with AdvantageGo's ecosystem. Cyber insurance has been on an epic growth journey in the past decade, and in that time has been transformed from a new and exciting product into a maturing pillar of the global specialty insurance and reinsurance markets. This is a class of business that has come so far that it is now developing its own catastrophe treaty reinsurance and insurance-linked securities markets. Those developments have been made possible in large part due to the enormous investment that the broader cyber ecosystem has made in researching, protecting, remediating, and modelling the risk that underwriters and the capital backing them are taking on. Cyber modelling specialist CyberCube has been one of the prime movers behind this increased market sophistication and is also a member of AdvantageGo's ecosystem. In this podcast, I get a masterclass on the state of the cyber market from Ross Wirth, CyberCube's head of partnership and ecosystem. And this is reinforced by a vision of what a smart, state-of-the-art underwriting workbench and underwriting control system can currently do and will be able to do in the near future from Simon Fagg, who is a director and product and solutions strategist at AdvantageGo. Simon has had a fascinating career during which he's made the transition from underwriting itself to the design of underwriting systems, and Ross has over 20 years' experience leading complex change programs at global insurers. Between this remarkable duo, we have all the bases covered. So, if you're interested in where the cutting edge between technology and best-in-class underwriting is today, and where it is heading in the coming years, listen on. I think you'll find this a very rewarding experience. Enjoy the podcast. Ross and Simon, welcome to the Voice of Insurance.
Mark, great to be here. Thanks so much. Look forward to the conversation with you and Simon. I'm excited about our new partnership here.
Likewise. Also looking forward to the conversation. I'm sure it's going to be very fruitful.
For anybody who doesn't know either of you, why don't you just give us a brief introduction of yourselves and your careers to date and sort of how you've got to the position you're in right now? Why don't you start, Ross?
Yeah, happy to. So I've been here at CyberCube. I'm on the leadership team, and I'm our head of strategic partnerships and ecosystem. I've been here at CyberCube for about 4.5 years, really helping grow this space, helping everything from owning our existing relationship across our existing accounts to now really focusing on partnerships over the last couple of years. And obviously, we're going to spend a bunch of time talking about that.
What was your background before that?
Before that, I spent about 2 decades over at a smaller company called Accenture that some folks may have heard of. Spent a couple decades over there in the insurance practice the entire time. So working in the consulting organization there, helping mostly carriers in the US, but some reinsurers, some brokers, some work in Europe, some work in Asia.
So Ross, you must have seen everything, at least more than once.
What's the joke about how much everything is similar in insurance? But yes, I did a lot of fun transformational programs at a lot of carriers, helping them as they replaced that first generation of insurance technology that had been out there humming on those big mainframes in the basement for decades and decades and starting to move into web-based orientations and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's been a great ride.
You'll remember the time when they said, we can't put it on the cloud. It won't be secure. We won't know anything about it.
Yeah, I actually ran some partnerships at Accenture and was part of one of the first deals that was a core policy admin suite in the cloud. And that was a fun and exciting time to help bring the client along for the ride and understand what the implications were and all the value associated with that. And then be able to actually see that in play and see them really realize the ton of that value and opportunity from that technology.
And CyberCube, so 4.5 years, that's fairly early into the CyberCube journey, isn't it? You're probably bigger now than what you were then, right?
Yeah, we're roughly double the size of people and more than probably almost 2.5 times the size of clients that we had when I started back in 2020. So yeah, it's been a fantastic ride as we continue to really serve all facets of the insurance market. And it's been a lot of fun, a lot of opportunity there. When I left Accenture, I knew a lot about insurance and transformation. I didn't know much about cyber analytics, so it was a huge opportunity to learn for me. And I've learned a ton, and there's a ton more to still learn out there. So yeah, it's been fantastic.
Simon, what about you?
Some parallels to Ross there, but my career began back in the early 1990s. So on the international property underwriting side, property, direct, FAC, lots of manual underwriting processes, I'm sure you imagine.
I was broking from 92 onwards. So yeah, I can sympathize. Where were you working?
At the time, that was Zurich.
Oh, wow.
So Zurich Re. So very interesting times in London underwriting centre there. But equally, emerging technology. So we were seeing the Californian CAT models really come into fruition. And so that recognition that technology is really going to have an impact in terms of process, risk evaluation, really triggered in my mind. And that's really what took me to that next step, thinking a bit more about solutions development from an underwriting perspective. What can I add there in terms of looking at the global carrier market and thinking about digitization as we came through the 90s into the early 2000s, the development of that end-to-end underwriting solution and what that looked like from a platform perspective.
Wow.
So working for a variety of carriers and syndicates at that time for the first 18 years of my career.
And when did you make the jump to the technology side completely?
I hit a point where I picked up so much in terms of what I understood about business process optimization, reengineering, end-to-end value chain of an insurance workflow. And I transitioned to the vendor side from a US market standpoint to RMS in a consultative role. So again, what you pick up there is the value of understanding carriers end to end, what really matters to them in terms of understanding exposure, loss, pricing of the risk. And spent 7 years at RMS and really just moved on to other things in the technology area before landing at AdvantageGo, where I just saw a company that's had a great foundation in the London market and the ability to apply some of that industry knowledge, technical knowledge that I've got to be able to solve clients' business challenges from a solutions construct perspective, incorporate that voice of the customer into the AdGo platform and really focus on how do we get to that optimal target operating model for our clients.
That's a hell of a journey. Right. Ross, you already started to tell us a bit about CyberCube. This podcast is all about introducing new members. Obviously, the constant part is the AdvantageGo side of it. And it's great to have you, Simon. It's really good to broaden out that experience, particularly with some of your kind of experience, Simon. That's absolutely amazing. This show is going to be more about CyberCube than it is about AdvantageGo, naturally, because we're showcasing new members of the ecosystem. CyberCube, I think you've been going long enough for people to have an idea of what you do, cyber modeling, but go more into detail.
Happy to, Mark. It's an interesting story. So CyberCube actually started back in 2015, incubated inside Symantec, and then actually spun out as a standalone company a couple of years later. And we've been a standalone organization since then. So I kind of like to say, and it was actually part of what intrigued me about CyberCube, we have a little bit of the best of both worlds, right? That nimble insurtech organization, as well as the rooted foundation in a global Fortune 100 organization as well. So a little bit of the best of both worlds from that perspective. I teased at the beginning, right? We are the largest organization in the world that thinks about cyber risk every single day. There's about 130 of us around the globe, and CyberCube represents the largest investment in the cyber risk quantification or cyber modeling space with over $100 million invested over the years. It's an exciting place to be. We have one simple mission, but it's a challenging one, right? Our mission is to be the world's leading provider of cyber analytics to quantify cyber risk. It's all about putting that dollars or pounds or euro value against cyber risk that an organization has. And throughout that journey, we've been able to really support the entire insurance value chain. So we have clients across the board, from the reinsurers, the reinsurance brokers, the carriers, the retail brokers, the wholesale brokers. So really that entire insurance value chain, really helping put those dollar numbers to those folks, everything from helping the brokers educate and peer benchmark their insured clients through to underwriters underwriting that risk, through to underwriters looking at capital positions and making decisions about reinsurance and partnering with their reinsurance brokers, and then into the actual reinsurers themselves in that space. So a really exciting and unique opportunity given where the marketplace is and how quickly it's been growing and changing, as well as being able to be there to help almost foster the newest line of insurance in, 100 years or so, right? This is a pretty quick changing environment, right?
Well, this has been the career-defining line of business for a whole generation of people. And it's been the thing that if they took this tiger by the tail, the tiger has taken some pretty exciting places in their career already because everything's multiplied by many factors. What sort of scale is CyberCube now? Forgive me if I just missed any of those details while you were saying. How many people around the world have you got now?
So about 130 people around the world, offices across the States, London, and Europe as well. I think just over 130 clients when we closed out 2024. So pretty exciting space and literally used all over the world. Of course, the US, that is still the largest cyber market, but here in London, across the EU, into the Middle East, we actually just signed a Saudi Arabian brokerage before the end of last year. We have clients in Japan, Australia, Asia as well. So yeah, global usage from every type of cyber insurance as well, everything from really small micro businesses of 1 or 2 employees, all the way up to the global multinationals. Those we're powering the analytics for to help them make those cyber risk decisions.
So it's anybody who's interested in cyber risk and not just necessarily cyber insurance then?
Our focus is really on the insurance side to date,
Yeah.
although it's funny you say that. We have had people knocking on our doors that are outside of the insurance space and saying, hey, can we apply these and that? So we've done some kind of consulting type engagements and those types of things and have explored some of those beyond cyber insurance into overall cyber risk in that space. It's not our primary focus, but it's certainly when the right people come to calling, so to speak, we're happy to have those conversations.
So it's quite a broad range. Do they all buy the same product? Or have you got a kind of core product that they all buy and then they buy different modules that go with it?
We have 3 core products. We started in our flagship product is what we call Portfolio Manager. And that's looking at overall portfolio and risk aggregation. So that started out as simply, quote unquote, catastrophe modeling for cyber. And that has now expanded to include also attritional loss and those pieces as well. But basically that allows the reinsurers, the reinsurance brokers, and the carriers to look at an overall portfolio of risk and understand what that overall exposure is at a macro level, rolling it up to one number, and then also being able to drill all the way down to an individual company in that portfolio, or even an individual technology within that portfolio and say, how much exposure do I have there? So that's Portfolio Manager that's used by those folks as they make capital decisions when and how they need to reinsure parts of their book of business and those types of exposures. So that's flagship product in Portfolio Manager. Our second product and where we're focusing to start with Simon and team at AdvantageGo is our single risk product called Account Manager. And that's all about the underwriter and allowing the underwriter as they're looking at that risk that's coming on their desk to say, what do I know about this organization? How does it compare to its peer groups? What's its exposure to cyber risk? And then also what's its security posture, that preventative nature? What are the things they're doing right? What are the opportunities they have to improve? And then also, of course, the quantification. What's the dollar risk associated with that organization? So that's the single risk underwriting tool, Account Manager. And then last but not least, on that far end of the spectrum, the wholesale brokers, the retail brokers, we have a tool that's kind of a rolled up version of that underwriting tool. That's called Broking Manager. And that allows those brokers to answer the biggest questions that their clients, that the actual insureds are asking, right? Which is, what the heck even is cyber insurance in some cases? What does this cover? Why do I need it?
How much should I buy? That kind
and
of
how much should I buy? And how much are my peers buying? In that tool, we can take you have a bad day. What does a bad day look like? And here's our loss curve in terms of how bad a bad day could get. And then we can do the peer benchmarking to say, hey, your peers are transferring risk with their insurance purchases at the 95th percentile. So they're covering 95 out of 100 bad days. And for you, that's $150 million or $15 million, or whatever the answer is. It's tailored to that specific risk, but benchmarked against what their peers are doing. So that's been very powerful to help with education and uptake of this new product.
So it's much more like a stripped down version because a broker doesn't need to, obviously the broker's not taking the risk.
I would say rolled up, simplified, but yes.
Yes, no, absolutely. Either, I suppose in today's model, you'd say that would be the free version, but I presume it's not free and then everything else would be premium, but nothing's free in this world. So what about the fundamentals? When Simon was earlier stages in his career, when he was working at RMS, you're talking about quake and you're talking about wind and you're talking about quake, obviously something that's tectonic plates that move over periods of millions of years and you can sort of see them. You can go and look at the cracks in the ground and you can go and smell the sulfur coming out of those cracks. And you can study the climate and it moves in patterns that are predictable. And I mean, they're all dynamic in their own way. They have their own dynamics, but they're slightly different. This is really dynamic because I suppose the ultimate dynamic here is a bad actor. It's a human being or a group of human beings doing something nasty. So how do you even go about it? What's that core methodology? This is almost like a philosophical question, by the way, Ross. It's sort of, how do you, obviously you won't be able to give me the secrets of how you do it, but how do you start to crack that problem? That's a big nut to crack.
Yeah, one is funny that you say philosophy because as we talk to folks about that, we literally say, hey, our modeling philosophy has 3 pillars as we think about how to model cyber risk. When I first start this conversation with folks that are not very familiar with cyber, and again, I am by no means the cyber expert, right? I'm someone who knows about insurance and how to do those things. So this is super helpful as I started to wrap my mind. The example I would always use is, and we'll take earthquake, your example there, right? I can know very, very, very little about insurance and exposure, but I can look at a map of the United States and I can tell you that where I live in Chicago has a lot less California earthquake exposure than someone in California. It's a little bit harder to look at that same map and say, well, how much exposure do you have on your book of business based on where these businesses are to Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services, pick a technology. And so what we've done, one of our core models is all about that technology space, right? And it's all about looking at that single point of failure. So at the end of the day, when there's a cyber exposure and a cyber loss, that always comes down to a single point of technology failure. There's always one piece of technology that's the entry point into that, and it may expand and grow within an organization. It may expand and grow across multiple organizations. It may start in one technology and move into a different technology, but there's always one at the end of the day. And so that's one of our core models, is what are all of those single points of failure? And our models are all tied to all of the activities that happen, and every dollar of loss that occurs is tied to one of those single technology points of failure. And so we start at that very low level detail, and then we consolidate and can roll that up to, okay, here's the technology that rolls up across all of the accounts in a portfolio. And then we can aggregate that up to a single account. So that's one of our pillars, is that single point of technology failure. Another pillar of the three is something that's a little challenging for some folks in the insurance industry, and a little challenging in particular for folks that have been doing property and natural catastrophe modeling for years. But we find it's just as important to look forward as it is to look backward. The insurance industry is very focused, and rightly so, on loss history and claims and those types of things. And in earthquake and hurricanes and fire and flood, we do have years, hundreds of years in some cases, of history to look back upon and predict. In cyber, we haven't had that huge cat event. We've had several near misses, and we can talk about a couple of those and how we then account for those. But we haven't had those huge cat events. So we are both looking back at claims history, of course, but we're also looking forward and exploring that type of risk and what that is. And you referenced the bad actors at the end of the day. The other metaphor or example that I like to use is, if I'm a hurricane that comes across and nails Florida, the next hurricane that's forming out there in the ocean is not watching that hurricane to figure out how to do more damage based on what the first hurricane did.
Exactly.
But guess what the bad actors are doing? They're doing exactly that. They're not starting from zero each time. They're standing on the shoulders of the last bad guy or gal and saying, how do I make this worse? Or how do I get into the specific areas that those folks couldn't get into? So that's why we find looking forward and exploring those things so important.
Just to interject on that point and just putting this in context, a lot of my background is around loss modeling and exposure management, and particularly having gone deep on property models over time. I think one of the key issues, key risks we have there is that systemic risk. And so absolutely there's parallels between looking at hazards, hazard evaluation, quantification, etc. But the ability and nature of cyber risk to be conjoined at scale. So if you liken this to property, you'd be looking at something like the difference between contingent BI and looking at something where, say, you have a supply chain attack or interconnected events that happen on a global scale at cyber. I think that's what makes it so difficult from a quantification. I mean, coming back to Ross's point there about historical views, obviously we've relied on those for the more traditional classes for an extreme amount of time. But I think that forward-looking trending of those views is just going to be more and more important. So not just looking at loss quantification, but looking at the complexity of this correlation of risk.
Yeah, because it's almost like slices of Swiss cheese, isn't it? The disaster only happens when you drop 10 slices of Swiss cheese. Normally, the holes don't all line up because they're fairly random. And you get a loss when a series of fail-safes that would normally shut them off, that somehow randomly something's been able to get through all those different systems and bits of Swiss cheese, and then finally it gets right through and something finally hits home. It's almost that way, isn't it? And to go back to that property analogy, Simon, back for your property days, the dynamic nature of cyber is amazing. It's almost like arsonists are surrounding every single property you insure, and they're smashing a hole in the window, trying to chuck a torch through there to set fire to the building. Then you close the window, and then you left another door open, and then the next thing you know, they're all in there trying to set fire to the whole. So it's a very different way of underwriting, isn't it? So it is so dynamic.
Absolutely.
You can imagine if it's all this sort of evil geniuses were saying, we've conjured up this Hurricane Milton, but look, it should have gone just a couple of degrees further north, then we could have wiped out Tampa, and then it would be a $200 billion loss instead of 25. Absolutely amazing. Yeah.
Cyber's not seasonal.
Well, maybe there's a season when all the hackers go on holiday or something. I don't know. But otherwise, no, it's not.
I don't think they get very good holiday benefits. They seem to always be there.
Ross, in terms of the industry, all this work you've been doing over the last decade is amazing, that you've got the industry, which would have started from quite a skeptical space, saying, this is systemic, you can't model it, to you really can model it. And we're getting much more comfortable about what is a 1 in 100-year event. And that's absolutely brilliant. In fact, what's interesting is, see, when I'm sitting from third party, obviously there are the other modelers. And of course, when there's a mathematical formula that, you're doing something in maths at a high level of maths, and you have to prove that formula, you have to go back, prove your answer by doing it a different way and then coming to the same answer. And the fun thing, what's been interesting, I think, about the maturity of the cat modeling space has been that, of course, there are a few other people out there trying to do similar things, probably not doing quite as well as you, Ross. But the interesting thing is that they're starting to coalesce around similar numbers, but using different methods. So for me, that goes back to the theory of mathematics, is proving that you must both be closer to getting right. And that gives me more confidence as a third party, as someone who's saying, oh, shall I risk $100 million on the first cyber cat bond? I think now that Ross and these other people have come to a number, but they're doing it by two different methods, it's kind of proving that they've probably got it right. So this is going to be something, of course, that is never finished. But you feel that You're getting to a point where this is really getting to a level of maturity where you can really bring the industry along with you and then help attract greater amounts of capital to this industry.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And as we touched on earlier, cyber is still in its infancy as we look at this industry, right? As we look at Lloyd's down the street from us and where this whole crazy thing started and how quickly it does or doesn't move, as the case may be. We have made, I think, really strong strides in partnership with our clients since starting. Over 70% of the global cyber premium is using our analytics somewhere along its journey. Are we comfortable that we're there? Like you said, the work is never done. There's always further refinement to be happening, right? We're in the midst of the next version of our portfolio and cat model that will come out later this year. And so the team is working very closely with our clients and the markets in general to say, what are the additional refinements? What are the pieces that we need to see? I think cat models in general are a very interesting tool, right? You don't know if they're right until a long time later, usually. And so that's always a little bit interesting. And so one of my other clients kind of said, models are never exactly right. And that's not what we're licensing this model for, is to get the exact number, but almost to get a baseline understanding, and being able to understand and articulate how CyberCube got to that number is super important. And that's part of why we've started with that super low level ground up, and being able to articulate that up and work that through with our clients allows our clients to have that confidence in the numbers, and then allows them, of course, to say, well, here's how we're going to tailor, basically use the CyberCube as a baseline currency, if you will, for this risk, and then tailor it a little bit based on our book of business, because every book of business is, of course, slightly different. Every portfolio is a little bit different and those types of things. So there's some specific capabilities, of course, that the carriers, that the reinsurers have that we, of course, just don't have. There's data, then things that they have within their four walls. So we work with them very closely to say, well, how do you tailor the CyberCube view of risk to tweak where necessary, those minor tweaks to align to your view of risk? So we have seen a very strong adoption of the model across the board in that space. And I think each time that we make a revision to the model, we're doing multiple types of calibration to that model, the gut checks, if you will. The first is, of course, internal amongst our team. And we have a very wide variety of backgrounds. That was one of the things that we realized early on as we were starting to build CyberCube. We can't build this with just a bunch of folks that have modeled other lines of insurance. Yes, we need those folks. We need underwriters, but we need underwriters that specifically know cyber as it's changing quickly. We also need cybersecurity professionals, which is why you'll see former members and leaders of cybersecurity organizations on our board of directors, as well as throughout our organization. So that type of expertise is there and built into the development of the model, the internal calibration as we release new versions. We partner with very closely on calibration as well. So we'll provide tools for them as we get into beta releases of the model to run through their portfolios, because again, we can test a ton of things, but we can't test everything that everyone is doing. So we'll do these calibrations in partnership with our clients. And then the last and not least is kind of validation against actuals and where the market has been. And we've been within 5 to 10 points over each year for the last several years in terms of where things are coming out, kind of aligning to our models and that. So that's helped us. That's helped our clients build confidence in the market in general to continue to build confidence in the space.
So it looks like it's going to be a really growing part of your business. You need modelers on calibration for catastrophe bonds, all sorts of things. This cyber cat market's going to really mature, obviously, from a reinsurance angle, because obviously a lot of that is reinsured on simply a quote share basis at the moment. And people are getting more comfortable with an event and also with the way they can define an event, which is going to be something more for their wordings people and their lawyers, but also you're going to be able to get the confidence of that cat bond community, a different type of investor, to say, right, we're quite confident that we're definitely at the right sort of level here. And so this looks like this is going to be a really big part of your business, just going to keep growing.
Yeah, we absolutely expect it to. And you would expect that as the market matures. And to your point, as people get more comfortable with this as a type of space where it needs more capital. It's no secret that the cyber overall premium has flattened off the last couple of years. We've entered a soft market after being in a very hard market for a number of years. But even the most conservative estimates show the cyber premium continuing to grow much faster, 20, 30% per year over the next several years, which means, of course, there will be need for more and more capital. We're privileged to have been involved in all of the public ILS transactions that have occurred to date. And that's a very important part of our business and the market in general, which we see as core. Obviously, we're here to help folks understand cyber and grow this market overall because we think it's too important of a coverage for the market not to be taken seriously.
I had a really interesting podcast, almost like a kind of roundtable on modeling in general. And Dickie Whitaker, who runs the Oasis loss modeling framework, which is an open source platform for everyone to put their models on. And he said, if any CEO ever comes to me and says the model got it wrong, I know that they just don't know what a model is.
Right.
That's the fundamental point, isn't it? I suppose this is a war that will never end, which is quite good being in a business in a war that will never end. And of course, we're all in a war that will never end. We'll never stop there being losses, because if we ever did, of course, there wouldn't be any need for insurance. So we'd do all of ourselves out of a job. But the great thing is we know that that can never happen, because there's always things can happen that we couldn't foresee. Talking about things that we couldn't foresee, CrowdStrike, how did that measure up? I remember we were all a bit worried about it in the first few days. And by the end of the week, when I'd canvassed enough people, it was sort of, well, it was a kind of business as usual. It was in the playbook. It wasn't some weird loss that we weren't expecting. Is that the way you saw it?
Yeah, we had CrowdStrike in our models. So the first question that we got as that popped up and we saw this happening, right? I woke up in the States to a whole thread of pings that have been going on from the team over here on this side of the pond that had been working on it for hours by the time I got up. And as you can imagine, the first question, of course, that boards at insurance companies are asking is, what's our exposure? What's the dollar amount? So we were able to very quickly connect with our clients and help them, guide them through to say, okay, here's how you can get that range for your organization and what your book and what your exposure looks like based on what we know as we know it, right? And this was before this was confirmed to have been an accident and not a bad actor. We then did also actually publish some general guidance overall to the market publicly around what that looked like based on the same kind of modeling tools that we have in our overall industry exposure database. So it was in there. That again, that's really a testament of back to that single point of failure philosophy that we have. Every single loss is tied back to a specific technology. And even if we don't have the specific technology by name, we have all the types of technologies in there so that you can go in and develop a proxy, even if the specific technology that's bad thing has happened to isn't in the model. You can go in and take a proxy for the type of technology platform that it is and use that to extrapolate across your book of business based on your limits and coverage and attachment points and all those. So CrowdStrike was two things. One, it was a bit of a proof point for us to validate this is how we can do this. This is how we can respond and help the market. And then two, since it was post kind of a near miss, if you will, is how we categorize that. It's one of several of these near misses. It was another opportunity for us to do what we call a counterfactual study or example and in those types of things. So basically, we dove into this and said, what if we changed two of the assumptions about this thing? So instead of someone accidentally pushing a bad update, this was someone who had gotten in there, a bad actor that had done a thing, and it didn't just break these computers. It sat there and captured all this information and did all these things, and it wasn't as recoverable. Those are the things we learned a ton from those types of counterfactual studies. And we do those both internally and in partnership with our clients as activities occur, which are huge learning experiences for us and for the market in general.
So it wasn't like a Katrina where it was, wow, we didn't expect New Orleans to flood because it's supposed to have flood barriers and the Marine Corps is supposed to be pumping the water out. And turns out that didn't work.
Yeah.
Simon.
I was going to say that this is no different to what we saw in the early days of property model validation and what we continue to see. And I do wonder whether we'll get to that same kind of ebbs and flows that we've seen there, where we get to a certain level of understanding of cyber as a line of business and the risk that it presents. And then a curveball comes along, such as climate change into property, that makes us all sit back, rethink about what do we actually know? Well, what do we know about leaning on those historical losses and being able to predict the way forwards? And I wonder whether we're going to get that awakening at a point in time where we gradually lean on more and more cyber loss model data and information to really inform our pricing exposure for the future.
We don't know when mass adoption of quantum computing comes, then things might be quite scary because I watch a few YouTube videos and stuff. It doesn't make me a PhD, but it's slightly frightening the way encryption might not work as well as we hope it would. For example, I'm massively oversimplifying here, I'm sure, but we won't know. It's a great point, Simon, about the way that property, the whole definition of property is it's static, isn't it? It's a load of bricks. and they're stuck in the ground and you can't move them out of the way, which is a shame because when you see the hurricane come, it would be nice if you could just move all your property out of the way of the hurricane like you can if it's an aeroplane or a ship, if it can go fast enough. But of course, property, the weird thing is the great paradox of the most static risk has now become more dynamic because it's the climate swirling around it's become more dynamic.
Indeed.
But cyber's always going to be dynamic and it probably will go through different growth spurts, won't it? It's bound to.
Well, yeah, and I think just to briefly build on that discussion about climate change and wildfires, right? We've seen that and that actually has raised questions in terms of folks around these models that have been relied upon so steadily, and folks, exactly to your point, Simon, and the folks that were pointing so hard to, well, we don't have any claims history for cyber, so you can't model it. And I would come back and counter us like, well, let's look at how's the modeling doing relative on wildfires the last couple of years, right? We saw huge losses, unexpected losses in 2018, 2019, 2020, and I don't think they fixed that problem coming here into what's just happened in early this year and those types of things.
Certainly, we can see the performance of some of the different carriers and to the degree to which they've bought the right amount of reinsurance or not would certainly suggest that this will all come out over time. But it does suggest that, of course, yes, some have been better at it than others, and we'll just leave it there. Something you mentioned before, Ross, about having more security folks, because of course we've got this dynamic risk and we put it back into our property analogy of there's a whole load of arsonists standing outside your building throwing petrol bombs at it all the time. Then it'd be nice to have a security force with big batons to sort of beat them away or at least, convince them to go home and leave us alone for a bit. That is certainly the way that the underwriting model has developed over time of this nascent class that I've been writing about for 20 years. I talked to some of those leaders in that market, the Beasleys and the CFCs of this world. Their models used to be they would partner with different security firms. And then they've realized over time, that they probably need to have their own security. So we've got Beasley Security. We've got a similar thing with CFC where they're doing much more stuff in-house. So as a modeler, are you able to give them credit for the kind of things that they're doing, that mitigation in real time that you can say, can you build that into your model? I can see that this one is better because it's got security guards sitting outside, making sure people don't leave windows open, etc.
Yes, and continuously evolving and changing, right, as this market overall. So the short answer is, yeah, our models are built on three things. We have some proprietary data that we're gathering ourselves, right? We're doing internet level scanning out there and looking at what's available and what can we see from the outside and gathering that proprietary data is one. We have a collection of data partners, around 24 different data partners that we also utilize to incorporate into the model. And that includes everything from firmographics to what types of losses are out there in the market, to some aggregated inside the firewall data and all of those types of things. And then last but not least, we also, especially on the broking side, we have the ability for the insured themselves to attest to and answer some of these questions around what their security posture and those things look like. And then those results are taken directly into account into the model. So that's kind of how our models work out of the box, if you will. And then again, back to kind of one of those other examples that I gave earlier, we work with a lot of our clients to say, okay, how do you take the models from CyberCube and the outputs of those and then layer on additional things, right? Of course, everyone would love to have 87,000 switches that they could all access and all of those types of things. I would love that, but unfortunately the data's not consistently and accurately there, right? And strangely, nobody's, not yet, but give me a call if anyone is ready to partner. And by partner, I mean write the check and spend the time to jointly build that. Love to do it. It would take me back to some of my prior solutioning days and those types of things. But all that to say, we do partner very closely with our clients to say, how's the best way for you to use this model in your workflow and into those capabilities and tailor it to, again, your view of risk. Yes, it's grounded in the CyberCube, kind of what's used consistently across the industry. Then how do you tailor it and tweak it based on the things that you're doing, based on your in-house security organizations, or based on the specific underwriting requirements that you have and those types of things. So that's a kind of constant partnership that we have with our clients as well.
Obviously, we're always taking into account the dynamic nature of the attack, but also it is fantastic now that there's also a more dynamic defense that is there. I suppose as a modeler, you've got to take both of those into account. It sounds like you're certainly able to do both, and you're able to build both sides of the equation into the thing.
Right.
Simon, what's the main objective with getting CyberCube to integrate into the ecosystem? What are you hoping to get out of it?
So Ross talks to that integrated platform view, and that is going to be very important, not just now, but in the future, and more so, particularly from a cyber line of business angle. So just to back up a little bit, and just so anyone who isn't au fait with AdvantageGo and what we do, we have an end-to-end P&C underwriting platform that ultimately supports underwriting teams in that holistic view. So how do we bring together all these different technologies, the different data points, the application capabilities, some of them being native, some of them which are brought in from third-party providers and vendors. So that provides that interconnected sort of insight, the workflow optimization across an underwriting team, particularly through that pre-bind processing, but also supporting everything from an end-to-end solution standpoint. So something like cyber, for instance, being one of those line of business curated views, we would tailor that very specifically. So a cyber underwriter is going to have a different view to a property underwriter. Property underwriters focus on that asset perspective. A cyber underwriter protections, mitigations, cases, losses, benchmarking, that sort of thing. So the metrics look different. The way in which they analyze and rate that business, looking at exposure, looking at loss and quantifying it, is different to some extent. There's absolutely parallels between the two. So by rolling out these specific line of business templates to our clients based on what they underwrite across P&C, we optimize their overriding workflow, align that to their target operating model. And then we work with clients such as CyberCube, being leading edge in terms of cyber and what they do, from the perspective of individual data that we can feed into exposure from enhancement perspectives, understanding of the threat landscape, really supporting everything the underwriter needs to do from a pricing perspective. So how do we consume that, present that to the underwriter or members of their team, and how do we orchestrate that through the process and ultimately give them something over and above what they're seeing from the submission? How do we change their view utilizing that trusted third-party data that's going to make them assess that risk differently? That's what's really going to matter to them. So that single pane of glass view and aligning that ultimately to the overall risk appetite of the organization.
So you're going to go into the underwriting workbench, they'll say, right, well, this is that submission from that broker, this is this thing,
Exactly.
But here's the CyberCube view on it, here's some scoring, here's all the metrics that the CyberCube's giving me. And then presumably at that chief underwriting officer level, they're going to be able to see how this is going to affect my aggregates. Should I have a word with my reinsurers and all that other stuff?
You're spot on, Mark. That's exactly it. It's how do you align that to the specific personas in the organization? So a CUO is going to look for a different view than a class underwriter, for instance. A UA is going to look for a different view to an exposure modeler, a loss modeler, etc. So providing those different views and surfacing them at the right time with the right insight. We live in this world where data is getting exponentially more. And it's all about how do you filter that to get to the right information? How do you qualify that? How do you fill the gaps in? How do you ensure that the data veracity is where it needs to be for you to truly quantify that risk accurately? So leaning on third-party providers like CyberCube really helps the underwriter to understand their risk better than they do with just the submission coming in the front door.
But it's a bit like the media. It's just listen to the voice of insurance and that's all you need to do. Read the Insurance Insider, read the Insurer. That's all you need to know because we've filtered through all this nonsense for you. And then here are the 10 most important things you actually need to know about today, what's happening. Yes, it's all about information overload and cutting through it so you can actually make the best possible decision that you can, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And Ross, joining this ecosystem with AdvantageGo, what's your main objective here?
I think Simon did a great job of setting this up. At the end of the day, we're very excited to join and partner with AdvantageGo on this. We want our data, very simply put, we want our data and analytics to be available at the point of decision making. We are not an underwriting or platform organization. We are very proudly a cyber data and analytics organization. And how do our cyber and data analytics be used in the best manner? And exactly as Simon laid out, if we can have that at that single pane of glass in the AdvantageGo underwriting desktop where the underwriters there looking at that submission, they can see, okay, here's the score, and therefore these are the recommendations. Therefore, we've applied your underwriting guidelines to this risk from CyberCube and the things that were part of your specific questionnaire and application. That ties back to a couple of questions you asked earlier, Mark, around how are folks tailoring this? How are we making sure that folks are getting credit for the security organizations within these insurers? All of that only happens when it's all tied together in one place. And so we are part of that data ecosystem, and we think a very important part of it to help actually put those dollars to it and quantify that risk. And so getting it there in front of folks where they're using it, we're very excited about that.
Ultimately, if Simon and his team are building a big digital room where they want to get as many underwriters as possible You want to be in that room, don't you? That's where it's happening. That's where the magic's going to happen. And you want CyberCube to be there.
The room where it happens, if you will.
Quick update, Simon, on where we are with the ecosystem. It's sometimes difficult to keep track. There's so many partners now.
Absolutely. This comes back to the earlier point of this world that we live in. We have a lot of data. How do you sift through it? How do you provide clients with the data that they trust from the right sources? If we look at it from the AdvantageGo viewpoint, we work across P&C. So that means it isn't just about cyber. So in cyber, we obviously have CyberCube now with the risk signals, the loss models. We have fortified data for outside-in threat protection, relatively 6 for industry classification, Xyway for loss data, etc. And we're continuing to announce new partners that we're working with because we want to give our clients the best selection that suits them and their business, their risk profile, the segment of the market they're in. If it might look different from the insurance direct capacity perspective than it does from a reinsurer capacity. So we want to be able to offer that, even if where there's overlap between the vendors ultimately that we bring in. And ultimately, we can utilize all this data as an aggregator of sorts to get to better decision making overall for the underwriter. So roundabout way to answer your question, that we are 20 plus in terms of our active integrated ecosystem partners at this point in time, but that spans across not just different lines of business, but also we take into account things like ingestion of data, data transformation. Yeah. How can we do that? Be efficient about that. So working with third-party providers there, such as Omnius Insurance, MIA, Ping, etc., to bring that data on, utilize technology, lean on that to reduce those low-value tasks that traditionally underwriting teams are continuously fighting against. And equally, as you can imagine, for everything else that exists end-to-end.
So it's really about doing all the integrating up front and also recognizing that it's up to the client to know what they want to use. We'll have competitors in certain areas and you think, well, I think my solution's better. But sometimes you never know that some people just use things because that's what they've always used. And they're so good at using it that they couldn't even, we're all like that with certain bits of software that we love because We're so proficient at them. We're such super users. We're so fast that we couldn't imagine there would be another piece of software that would be any better, even though there probably is. But it's that kind of positive idea of recognizing that it's the customer who's actually in charge of all this, but you just want to make it as easy as possible for them as well.
Absolutely. And they're going to have their own data feeds as well. So this is internal data feeds. It may be from their claim system. It may be from their own CRM that they have, their own pricing models, etc. But equally, we want to provide not just best in class, but a whole array of different data points that potentially can be used. And let's face it, these are changing continuously. Technology is evolving so quick. The amount of data that we're consuming and is made available in the public domain is growing. So bringing all this together is ultimately going to inform a much better view, shall we say, than ultimately we have today. And what we do with the platform is we enable that ease of change, configurable, instead of being development focused, as things traditionally were with insurance technology. So the ability to swap in easily and connect utilizing API interfaces into these various services so we can stream data in dynamically and we can have as near to real time for decision making.
Absolutely. Well, I've got two technologists in the room. I always like to ask them about AI. It's something we've had to ask about really for the last couple of years. Well, Ross, what do you think the long-term implications are for AI? And what are the best use cases within the insurance value chain? I suppose I should also ask you about what about the threat, also the cyber threat? I'm sure, let's face it, hackers have probably been using AI longer than most people. So anything interesting coming out of that you're going to have to put into your models in terms of new way, threat vectors and all that stuff?
Great question. Or should I say AI? Never heard of it. Yeah, and how long do we have? Another hour and a half or so to cover this tiny little topic?
Okay, give me the slightly dumbed down version for me.
There's a couple of things. Each year we do a predictions report at the end of the year that we publish at the beginning. And our co-founder and chief product officer, Ashwin, was talking about AI specifically in his prediction. And it was specifically around, as we're starting to see the things that are just coming out now, the agents in AI, where they can go and within specific parameters, go do things on your behalf. And the concern is that, yes, those will unleash a lot of valuable things, But in the short term, there's a lot of really scary things that can happen with those when you can go unleash AI and to have it go do things on your own. So concerned in the short term that there's more risk right away on those. We have to make sure those are structured appropriately protected and those types of things from the folks that are actually releasing the AI itself. So I think that's one. The other example that we've been talking about for feels like ages now, but I guess it's probably only a couple of years, is one of the largest injury points is clicking a link on the email, right? We get the emails all the time, every day. And you've all done the trainings and they say, make sure everything's spelled correctly. With AI, guess what? It writes better English than I do, right? At the end of the day, I can write British English a lot better with AI than American English and so on and so forth. So
used to be the telltale slightly Russian dropping the definite article. Click unlink.
Yes, you'll click link now. Yes, exactly. Right.
So, yeah. Easy to spot.
Exactly. So those things as we continue to, so what are the defenses for those? I think then on the counter side or the flip side of that, the positive and the opportunities are hugely there as well. From day zero, CyberCube's models have leveraged machine learning, right? Always and will continue to do so. We're launching some of the chat capabilities to launch new interfaces, if you will, right? We have SaaS web apps, we have integrations into places like AdvantageGo, but then we're also launching some of these text-based things. And we were chatting about some of those opportunities there of the, boy, it would be really neat to simplify this interaction in some cases. As much as I despise email, our broker friends still live in email every single day. So if they could just email things over to CyberCube and get something back automatically, wouldn't that be neat? Those types of things. And then similarly, I think on the insurance side of the house, on the carrier side of the house, as they look at, can they leverage AI? And I'd imagine, Simon, we haven't talked about this use case, but it's probably one for us to explore later this year is, can we take within the AdvantageGo underwriting platform and leverage AI to say, well, here's all the data I have, here's the analytics I have from CyberCube, here's what I have within my internal rules, here's what I know about my internal book of business, and use the AI to do some of that underwriting assistant type work or prioritization of that work. And that really helps again with that information overload, because we know at the end of the day, the underwriters are just always going to be just aggressively overworked. So those are a couple of kind of areas that I continue to be excited about out in the marketplace.
So Simon, how far are we away from the sort of little assistant popping up, particularly for the CEO, saying, what's everyone been up to? Have you not noticed you're getting a bit overloaded in Brazil, or you've got too much Amazon Web Services on your cyber or whatever?
I would actually answer that, Mark, in that we are nearer than you think to that. The evolution, and particularly to what Ross talks about there, is that we've already seen a prolific use of AI across different areas of the end-to-end value chain in insurance. That will start with the chatbots, et cetera, and a lot of the retail end, et cetera. But in terms of the carrier end, the specialty, we're now looking at this efficiency of everything that we're doing. We're looking at risk management, compliance, claims processing, fraud detection, and pricing. There's all these different angles. And I think that pricing and insights perspective very much comes back to building of appropriate models, often aligned around specific lines of business across P&C, using very well curated data. And I say that because the false positives, everything that can potentially exist, can be extremely convincing in terms of the sort of data that comes out the back of them. So I think that's one of the big qualifiers right now. But to your point of when do we get to the Q&A that comes back, that's fully automated, that makes a lot of sense, that's going to tell the underwriter about their risk, something that they didn't know, that ultimately is going to change their view on the exposure risk and therefore downstream pricing. We are actually in the process of looking at this right now from a large language model perspective, specifically for cyber being the first line of business that we're focusing on in that way. And it's going to take time. It's going to take a little bit of time to go through some cycles of that, make sure that we can validate that those insights are genuine and they're founded on good sources of data, and ultimately present them back as part of that integrated workflow in an automated sense as that submission goes through the process of pricing. Asking the underwriter, have you thought about these three things? These are top of mind. Here's the alignment to current risk appetite. Here's the alignment to dynamic capacity management. Here's the alignment to current risks, things that are happening day to day in the news cycle that can rapidly change your view on whether you wish to actually underwrite that risk or not. So To answer your question, we're not long off that at this point in time, but it's going to take an evolution to as you get there in terms of really just sound that out so it's 100% solid.
That sounds absolutely amazing. Both of you, I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's kind of put me in a good frame of mind. I feel like it's sort of striding out into the world, feeling slightly better about the world, and that there are some people who are doing a good job here, trying to make it a slightly safer place. So keep up the good work. And it's moving so fast that we'll have to have you back very soon to talk about what you've been up to. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Thanks for having us.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, don't forget to subscribe or leave a like or a review or recommendation on whatever podcast platform you used to access this program. These really help get the word out. Before we go, just a quick reminder that advertising slots are available here and in other places in the Voice of Insurance podcasts. Podcasting is the fastest growing medium and attracts a high quality audience of key decision makers. It's also an intimate medium where you, the listener, are right in the room with me and the interview subjects. Needless to say, that means it's a great way of getting your message out directly to an audience because you know you've got their full attention. It's also very cost effective. So get in touch with Mark at thevoiceofinsurance.com to find out how you could be speaking directly to the industry. The Voice of Insurance is produced in association with AdvantageGo. Release your underwriters to underwrite with AdvantageGo's underwriting platform. Voice of Insurance is produced by me, Mark Gagan. Music was written by Anna Gagan and produced by Carlos Gagan. Check out more podcasts and written comment pieces at www.thevoiceofinsurance.com.